I'm Chad Reed.
I'm Hillary Langer.
I'm Gil Jenkins.
I'm Guy Van Sickle.
And this is Climate Positive.
About 80% of the buildings in New York City are heated by steam heat radiators. And of the emissions that the city generates, I believe the majority is from space heating. If you think about it, what other fuel is consumed, combusted in New York City? It's cars and it's buildings, heating.
Today on Climate Positive, I'm joined by Marshall Cox, the founder and CEO of Kelvin, a company turning century-old radiators into smart, energy-saving machines. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Marshall, and as always, we appreciate you leaving a review and a rating wherever you get your podcasts. Marshall, welcome to Climate Positive.
Thanks, it's great to be here.
Can you share the story behind the founding of Kelvin, formerly Radiator Labs in 2013? And you have to tell the inspiration as it relates to your twin brother who was visiting you at your apartment in New York. And then from there, we'll get into where Kelvin is today, where you're going. But let's start with the origin story.
Yeah, sure. No worries. So the company actually, the early days was actually 2011.
2011? Okay.
Yeah, I have a twin brother who's a now retired professional ballet dancer who's actually relatively famous. Was a presidential scholar of the arts. He went and shook Bill Clinton's hand on stage. And then he was a professional dancer for 10 years in Miami State Ballet. And then he wanted to quit that before he got too old to do anything physical. And so he got into a big Broadway show. He was a principal dancer in this new Twyla Tharp show in New York. And he moved to the city with me. Well, I was at Columbia, and so he moved into my dorm room because you never know how long those shows are going to last. And he slept on my floor. And the heat in the winter was so bad. He was next to the window, so it would get super, super hot, and then he'd open a window, and then it would get super, super cold. And he was super unhappy, and he was very vocal about that.
He let it be known to his twin brother. I
Yes.
imagine, the dynamics, double dynamics, brother, twin, an artist.
Oh, yeah. It was very clear that he was not happy about it. And so kind of as a side project, it was very annoying to me, so I shared that annoyance with my PhD group and my advisor, who urged me to do something about it. So I built this kind of little bubble wrap thing with a computer fan and Arduino and controlled the temperature, and it worked really freaking well. And so I took that data to Columbia facilities, and they were interested in trying it out. And that was the beginning. So I built I learned how to sew. I built these fabric weird covers and installed them in a building at Columbia, and it didn't work well at all. But I got some really good data, and then we won a big prize from the MIT Clean Energy Prize. We won the grand prize in 2012, and that was about $250,000. We used that to develop a first real system. We installed in a larger building, and it worked super well. That gained the interest of NYSERDA, and then everything kind of snowballs.
So you're like, I'm an entrepreneur now. I'm no longer in the labs.
Yeah.
Solved a problem. And fast forward to today. So Kelvin, and let's get into the flagship product, the Cozy. In many ways, it's an insulated radiator cover, but it's a whole lot more.
Yeah. So the company's mission has always been the same. I always felt that, I was an entrepreneur before this company too, not to the same level, of course, but the market that I perceived in overheating in New York seemed like the biggest. I'm an environmentalist through and through. My PhD was in organic solar cells. And the amount of energy that I thought could be mitigated through efficiency in these buildings in New York City was more than I could ever hope to have an impact in any other field.
And what's the stat there? It's 80% of buildings are steam.
About 80% of the buildings in New York City are heated by steam heat radiators. And of the emissions that the city generates, I believe the majority is from space heating. If you think about it, what other fuel is consumed, combusted in New York City? It's cars and it's buildings, heating. Power plants are not in the city. So those the emissions are from these buildings. And obviously when you have a huge building in the middle of February with all of its windows open, you're
deeply inefficient.
It's extraordinarily inefficient. I'm pretty sure this is a safe thing to say that single pipe radiator steam buildings are the least efficient buildings on the planet.
Yeah, but you got to, on some level, the amazing, you're an engineer, right? I mean, these were built, they're lasting, so we have the technology now. So
no, these buildings were built to last, right? 100 years old often, and often a lot more than that too. They're awesome. And as we talk later on about, our electrification plans, I want to
get into that. I certainly want to get into that, but paint a picture of the Cozy smart radiator cover.
Yeah, so radiator heated buildings, steam and hot water. Water or steam courses through the building and heats up radiators at different amounts depending on how close they are or how fast the air vents out of them. And so you get really hot radiators across the building at different times, rooms that need different amounts of heat. And so you can imagine, for those people with sciencey backgrounds out there, a Gaussian distribution a normal distribution of temperatures for a building. A lot of apartments are hot, a lot of apartments are cold. There's some that are right there in the middle. Unfortunately, or fortunately, in most cities, there are statutory minimum temperatures that if the building does not provide enough heat to those apartments, they don't have to pay rent. And that number is 68 degrees Fahrenheit. And so if any apartments are under 68 degrees Fahrenheit in a big rental building like you have, like most of these buildings are, those persons don't pay rent. And as you can imagine, the people who run those buildings do not let that happen. And so the bell curve is shifted dramatically up so that the lower curve is always above 68 degrees. And so everybody else is dramatically overheated. There's people whose apartments, if their windows were closed, would be 95 degrees Fahrenheit. It's outrageous. And so what the Cozy does is it is a smart radiator cover that goes on most of the radiators in the building. It measures the radiator temperature and the room temperature. And if the room is over the set point temperature, the fan doesn't turn on, and it blocks heat from coming out of the room. Doesn't let hot air convect out. It's insulating. And so the room gets cooler. And then if the room cools down below the set point, the fan turns on and blows that heat back onto the room. And so when you stop heat from escaping from a radiator to unnecessarily overheat one apartment, since the steam system or the hot water system is just one system, that energy can actually flow to different apartments. And so we almost literally push heat from hot apartments to cold apartments and make that bell curve, that distribution much, much tighter so that most of the apartments now are around the 70, 72 degree range and very few are above the 75 degree range. And so you eliminate essentially 25 to 40% of heating costs and fuel consumption as a result.
Fantastic. And I want to come back to the carbon story as we get into the broader implications. But what's install like? Super easy, right?
Super easy. So one of the nice things about what we do, the hardest part about what we do and the hardest part of any company doing anything in units like this, people's homes and multifamily, is getting access. So you want to minimize the time you're in there. You want to be as fast as possible, and you want to use the most widely available labor possible. So the Cozy doesn't have anything to do with plumbing. Right? We don't need a plumber. We don't need to cut any pipes. You don't want to be cutting 100-year-old pipes. So this thing just plops right on top and then plugs into a wall. So we don't need any licensed labor. There are thousands of companies that would love to install this and have the more than enough expertise to do it. And we either survey a room where we know what size radiators are, we build them, we deliver them, someone walks in, drops it on, plugs it in, and walks out. It's really, really easy.
And these have to be somewhat custom, though. How many of these have you installed?
We've installed about I'd say 20,000.
20,000
to date.
Wow. And is there somewhat a uniformity in these radiators that were? That's.
So some buildings do. There's campus buildings that have maybe 3 different sizes, and those are really easy. We go in and we just build a lot of these sizes and deploy them where they're needed. Some buildings have gone through 60 years of people complaining it's too hot and a radiator being removed and a smaller one being put in. So universities are a good example of the trying to balance it themselves. The brute force solution is that we go into these buildings, we survey everything, and we build them custom and we deliver them, and that economically works. That survey step is another site visit, and that's a little painful, but the fact that we can arrive with the exact right cover solves a lot of issues in the install side.
No, it's pretty common for all home energy efficiency audits. I mean, that's a standard step.
Totally. That being said, we are developing a modular cover, and that's ready. We're going to make our first big order of that. And this is a system that can adapt to different radiator sizes. And you'll need to know that most of the radiators are the right size, but it should cover about 80% of the radiators out there just with kind of 1 or 2 SKUs. And so we'll inventory that, and then we'll cut off a significant portion of the lead time because we don't have to custom manufacture it anymore.
Right. So you mentioned the energy and cost savings. Let's talk about the financing. You offer zero money down. It's sort of like pays for itself for a couple of years. Talk about the go-to-market model and the financing options for.
So over the past many years, if we learned anything, we've learned that people don't want to spend money.
Indeed.
And it's obvious, right? Even, people who run these buildings, they're humans. They're just like you and me. They have feelings about the environment, et cetera, blah, blah, blah. But the bottom line is that these buildings are businesses. They can't do anything if it doesn't make financial sense. And so, there's a whole slew of the market that doesn't have access to capital at all and can't spend money even if they wanted to. And then there's people for which it has to make economic sense for them to vote to do it. So overarchingly, the way we responded to this need is we launched last year a subscription plan. We talked to and worked out a deal with a company called ClearGen that works with Blackstone to fund deployments based on contracted subscriptions. And so we go to buildings now and we say, hey, this is your energy. We're very good at calculating what their loss is and how much we'll save. We say, this is how much you'll save a year. This is the subscription cost. It's between $10 and $20 per apartment per year. And it's almost always less than the amount of money they'll save. And so we'll contract with them for 10 or 15 years. ClearGen will give us the money to deploy it. We'll deploy it for free, and then we'll start charging once it's in operation, and It's an instant ROI, no upfront cash, and they're saving more than they're spending every year.
And talk about in New York, we're going to walk out a bit on policy, something called Local Law 97, which I'm somewhat familiar with, but give an overview of what Local Law 97 is in New York, what the measures are to compel building owners to take another look at efficiency solutions and where you fit in there.
So Local Law 97 is the law aiming at increasing the efficiency of buildings in New York City. Again, with the lens that most of the emissions come from building heating. So what it makes buildings do, depending on what kind of building you are, is calculate your energy use in something called a EUI, energy use intensity, your energy use per square foot. And depending on where you are on the scale, it'll say, this is what your limit is. You can't emit more than this. If you're emitting more than this, you're going to get fined a dollar amount per ton of carbon that you emit. And for some buildings, that's extraordinarily high fines. Now, whether the city actually fines buildings or not is actually a question mark, because they do not want to penalize their, co-ops, right? They want to help them get to a place where they're more efficient. But what it definitely does is it has increased the visibility of this for all the buildings in New York City, right? If you need to be compliant with this law, you have looked into it and figured out, how much your building emits. And so in light of that, there's a lot of people who say Local Law 7 is terrible because it's just making us spend all this money. It's way too expensive. No one can ever be compliant. And Kelvin has come out, especially with this subscription plan, and said, hey, it doesn't have to cost you a lot of money. It doesn't have to cost you any money to be compliant.
Right.
We're here
savings are within.
Exactly, right. Like the savings will pay for the technology implementation. Whether it's the cozy or hybrid electrification, which we're talking about in a second, everything we design is built around that basic premise. It has to make economic sense for people to do it.
Well, why don't you talk about hybrid electrification? And, clearly the movement in building decarb is electrification. I'm kind of amazed over the last few years about the sort of heat pump. I'll refer to it lovingly as a religion. Heat pumps are great, but you guys are probably working on a heat pump. But electrification is a journey, right? And there's things you do, and the goal is emissions along the way. And we don't want to be cost prohibitive. That's not going to be the uptake. I'll get off my soapbox, but I heard you talk about your approach, and maybe you could break that down, how Cozy integrates with and what Kelvin's doing on broader building electrification trends.
Yeah, totally. So first of all, we are not building our own heat pump because there are plenty of people doing that. So our goal is to implement heat pumps in a way we call it resource efficient decarbonization. So kind of take
I like it.
That's right. So take a quick step back. If you were to guess how many buildings in New York City of our target market have electrified, what would you guess?
Because I'm a little close to this, it's a pretty low number, right?
It's an extraordinary low number. It's less than 1%. It's actually, I think it's less than a dozen. Maybe it's more like 2 dozen now. Anyway, it's a drop in the bucket. And New York City is one of the markets where you think there's the most pressure, in the world, maybe, certainly in the United States, to electrify. And the reason why it hasn't happened is because the electrification scenario for a large multifamily radiator heated building is outrageously expensive. It's because there's no ductwork that you can tie into. You have to, either blast a hole through the wall or run refrigerant lines throughout the entire building. It's really, really expensive. There's some new companies out there that are great that are building window cold climate heat pumps. And these are really fantastic pieces of technology, but they're really expensive. And the unfortunate thing is that you electrify your building, most of the costs that you bear are when it's really cold out, because the systems are less efficient when it's really cold out, and they consume more electricity per unit of heat they produce, and they need to go full blast during those colder winter snaps. So the price of heating for full electrification is actually a lot higher than the price of heating from natural gas. No surprise, natural gas is cheap. What we are doing is we're saying, look, these radiator systems are there. They're going to die at some point. The boiler's going to die, but it's not going to be for 10, 15 years. And let's not wait until that happens, but let's deploy a heat pump solution that works in conjunction with that boiler system while we can. So hybrid electrification is the idea of deploying window form factor heat pumps, just a simple swap out of your existing air conditioner, and run those when weather permits, i.e. above freezing. And then when it gets really cold out, turn the steam system back on, or the hot water system. And so what that allows you to do is heat above 32 Fahrenheit, which is about 70% of the BTUs you need for heating in the winter. So you can do 70% decarbonization with an extraordinarily cost-effective window heat pump, which costs kind of the same order as an air conditioner. And then that cost of heating is lower than the cost of natural gas heating, because window those heat pumps are very efficient at those higher temperatures. And then when it gets really cold out, you turn the steam system on. That's natural gas like normal. You're using a system you're familiar with. So overall, we can do about 70% decarbonization today for zero cost to the building owner, again, because we're deploying it financed through demand response revenues. We turn these things on or off in the winter and shift their load. And that generates enough revenue to pay for the full implementation of the system.
So you're able to do the demand response because of the sensors on the Cozy and the, how does that work?
Yeah, we already have full building diagnostics, right? The Cozy is wirelessly connected to the cloud. We have data analytics teams. We know exactly when the building needs heat, when it doesn't, if it's going to get windy, if it's going to get snowy, right? We can take all this information, including in the summer, decide into the heat pumps to control the heat pumps based on what they actually need to do to maximize demand response revenues while maximizing comfort. And, on paper, it works super well. We'll be deploying the first systems this year.
Excellent. Just back to the gas. So how much gas is wasted in New York City buildings due to this inefficiency?
I calculated this a few years ago, and it's on the order of about $1 billion in fuel a year. It's a lot of money.
Yeah. Wow. I want to come back to the channel strategy. So tell us about the partners, right? It's these HVAC contractors, it's the building owners, it's real estate agents. Like, break down the universe of partnerships who are going to help you educate the market.
Yeah. So this year, 2024, about 50% of our sales were through sales partners. And our installs are, 90% through install partners. And sometimes it's the same entity who are helping to sell and helping to install. But more often, we'll be introduced to customers through companies that exist to help buildings figure out what to do. Right. So there's a number of businesses that evaluate buildings, tell them how much they're consuming, tell them where the opportunities are for efficiency, and they often recommend us because we're a really good solution for them. But the universe of partners could be, people who install plumbing contractors, air conditioning contractors.
These are hot trades right now.
For sure. Absolutely. And, our system's a lot easier to install than a lot of the other ones. So you can do it faster. The economics are really good, so they'll make a lot of money. And our job is to make all of our partners a lot of money, right? Like, you want to motivate everybody, the building owner, the resident, and the installation partner, to move as fast as possible and be excited about what's happening. So yeah, if you have expertise as a company in getting into people's homes and doing anything there, you're probably able to install a window heat pump, right? Or put an enclosure over a radiator. So the universe of potential partners is vast. And this is in contrast to full electrification, right? Like, a heat pump, a traditional heat pump, requires an HVAC technician to install. And trust me when I say I'm a huge fan of heat pumps. Like, I think they're amazing. But they're not for everywhere and not for everything. But they work, they're getting better and better. But there's not enough trained HVAC technicians.
Yeah, I found that myself. They're sort of skeptical when you ask them about it, or they don't know, or they try to bring you back to the traditional HVAC.
Yeah, a lot of, people just don't have trust yet. And that will change. And that's actually one of the reasons why we're doing hybrid electrification, because it's a much harder conversation to say, hey, let's just rip out your boiler and install this new system you've never used before. Whereas we are saying, hey, we're going to heat you most of the year with heat pumps. And then when your boiler does die, we're going to know first because we're controlling the whole thing. We're going to say, hey, your boiler just died. It might be February. Whereas it would have been an utter emergency before and you just get a new boiler. Now you have time because our hybrid electrification system can heat you in the coldest weather of the year. And this is the full electrification solution we've done for your building. We've already talked to you about it. Press this button and we'll do it. And we've optimized that solution so much for you that it costs less than your boiler replacement. Our goal is not only to do majority electrification today, but set up the building for full electrification when the boiler does die.
Yeah, makes complete sense. How have you thought about this solution maybe it's not the best analog, but I always think of the sort of Vanguard Nest when they took off and what that meant for energy efficiency in DER. Obviously, this is observing that, or what have you learned from that? Is there still do customers want the gamification element? Like, do you have a cool app, or is that we're sort of beyond that in some ways? Is you just want it to work and save you money? People
just want it to work and they want to be comfortable. So we have an app, we have all, the gizmos, and we're always making it better. And everybody opens the app and they often open it once. And then they set their temperature and they never look at it again. And that's great. It's what you'd expect, right? Like, by and large, most people don't care about their radiators. It's there, it provides heat. They only care about it when it gets super hot or super cold. And so if they can set a temperature and never think about it again.
Or they're fighting with their partner about that.
Sure, exactly. Now, people who do care is the building owner, the person who pays for fuel.
You're darn right.
So we have this whole dashboard for, those teams that gives insights and alerts. We can tell you like, hey, apartment 1C, the radiator just got cold and it's not heating up again. It's probably a busted steam trap or air vent or whatever it is. You should send a team to fix it. And that's before the resident gets cold. So there's a whole level of analytics that...
Yeah, the supers love you guys, right?
Yes.
There's less
that's right.
of complaints.
There's enormously fewer complaints. And that is one of the primary value propositions.
And what are the common misconceptions still today, and how are you overcoming those amongst perhaps building owners?
The main one that we've overcome is trust. So as you can imagine, if you own a building, you are bombarded with sales, people saying, I can do this, I can do that, all day, every day. And, we're another one of those voices. And, why is the building owner going to trust that we can save 30% when they got 30 emails the day before about another company that can save 30%? And the way we overcame that is by primarily getting that $100 million debt facility with ClearGen and Blackstone, right? Like we went through an enormous amount of diligence with them. And now that we can go to a building and say, hey, ultimately ClearGen and Blackstone, who you are very familiar with, will pay a lot of money to install this. Not only does that buy us trust for the customers who would purchase through a subscription, but it buys us trust through people who won't purchase through a subscription. So it's increased sales across the board as a result. So that's, you got to put your money where your mouth is. And when someone else is willing to do that, that's a pretty good indication that it's a real thing.
Fantastic. We've been talking a lot about New York, where you all are based and where there's tremendous market opportunity. But as you've grown, you're looking at other markets, right? I love it's colder and older cities. Tell me about where you're going.
So we're deployed mostly in New York City right now. There's a pretty significant expansion push this year, but we already have units in Boston, Providence, DC. We are now expanding to Chicago. So our goal is to have about 10% of our sales in other markets this year. And then we raised a Series A in 2023 with a great firm called 2150, and they're a European-focused climate VC. And that's because Europe is our next expansion market. Any building that had significant growth before 1960, and certainly before World War II, has a ton of radiator-heated buildings. And all of these buildings, whether it's steam or hot water, have this significant barrier to electrification that hybrid electrification can overcome.
Oh, fantastic. We ask all our guests sort of a series of rapid-fire questions. There's no wrong answers. First answer that comes to mind, or we can move on. So most of these are fill in the blank. First question, the word or phrase I most overuse is?
Resource-efficient decarbonization.
All right. That's good. That's a good acronym, though. The key ingredient to my productivity is?
Existential dread.
That tends to be a motivator.
Yeah.
Your favorite sustainability buzzword and your least favorite?
Yeah. So let's start with my least favorite. Least favorite is, what's it called? Megatherms.
Oh. Why is that your least favorite? Just connotes a monster? Or?
It's just annoying. It's an annoying phrase.
Megatherms.
Yeah. Most favorite, if it's not resource-efficient decarbonization.
Is it decarb? No, that's a tough one, but we're all using it, right?
I say hybrid electrification a lot too.
Okay.
These days.
I'll let that pass. The most challenging part of my job is?
I think it has to be just staying on mission. It's been a long road. We've been doing this for a long time, right? There's a huge number of barriers. And then you get, policy changes that you have to adapt to.
A mentor that inspired me?
Professor Kamissis, my PhD advisor. I had a job before getting my PhD in Boston you ever heard of QLED TVs? The Samsung QLED?
Yeah, I have a quick follow-up on that.
Oh, nice.
But go ahead.
So I was at the company that invented that and then got acquired by Samsung. And he was almost a founder, but he knew he was going to be a professor. And when he left, I followed him because he was so great. I was like, hey, can I join your group? And he's extraordinarily entrepreneurial. He's extraordinarily smart and definitely an enormous source of support and ingenuity for me.
What was the name of the lab?
CLU, Columbia Laboratory for Unconventional Electronics.
Oh, that's such a great acronym and a name.
Yeah.
You had fun in there, I bet.
We had a lot of fun.
So you have patents for these QLED technologies that we see in our TVs. So my question is, does this make you like an uncompromising person when you're at Best Buy deciding which TV to buy for the Super Bowl?
For sure. Although I'll say we don't really watch TV in my house.
Ah.
I have a TV. It's super old. But if I were to buy a TV, I'd be like, I know exactly what we're buying. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I can bore anybody beyond the realm of possibility.
So don't go to Best Buy with you because...
Yeah, exactly. I can be like, this is why this TV is great. And I'll explain to you exactly why the color gamut is fantastic. Yeah.
Now I'm having a little insecurity about the TV that I just bought mindlessly.
We shouldn't go there. All TVs are great.
Yes. Well, putting TV aside, the book that has influenced me the most is...
Oh my gosh. I don't know. I really like Ender's Game when I was little.
Oh, yeah.
It's like the only book that I made my wife read that she also loved. So like it has like a universal appeal. I think about that book a lot.
Have you read it to your kids?
No, no.
Too young?
Yeah, too young. I'm waiting with bated breath for Harry Potter, but I haven't even read Harry Potter. I'm excited to read it with them.
Oh, you'll have fun. Finish the sentence. I want my kids to know
how to do things themselves.
Yeah.
How to fix stuff, how to build stuff.
All right. Signature final question we ask all our guests. To me, climate positive means?
I don't know how long the answer can be, but it means, I'm going to use it in the context of like someone can describe themselves as climate positive if they are interested in understanding the problem and interested in doing something about it, either personally or more than that.
And that's what you're up to at Kelvin.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Marshall. This was fun. Really applaud what you're doing and wish you the best of success going forward.
Absolutely. Thank you. It's great to be here.
If you enjoyed this week's podcast, please leave us a rating and review on Apple and Spotify. It really helps us reach more listeners. You can also let us know what you thought via Twitter at ClimatePosiPod or email us at climatepositive@hasi.com. I'm Gil Jenkins, and this is Climate Positive.